It's great to welcome back to the program today Jonathan Haidt, who is an author, social psychologist, and professor at NYU's Stern School of Business. He recently wrote an article for The Atlantic called Why the Past 10 Years of American Life Have Been Uniquely Stupid. Jonathan, always great to talk to you.
Thanks, Dave. It's great to be back with you.
So in the article, you talk about a number of different things. You lead with the story of Babel as a sort of metaphor for what's happened in the United States since the starting in the 2010s, and the sort of fractured nature of the country. You talk about social media. You talk about political discourse. You've talked about the impact of Trumpism sort of on discourse and society. For people who maybe have not yet read the article, and we'll link to it and everybody should, can you give us sort of a flow chart, a directional flow chart of the phenomena you observe?
Sure. Yes. Thank you for that. That's a good setup because we think in narrative, we think in stories, things make sense. What we're going through now is so hard to understand. But if we tell the story, and it goes like this. In 1989, the Berlin Wall falls. We have this incredible period of optimism about democracy. This is also the period of the early internet. We had this incredible period of optimism about technology. For those who remember, the early internet was this magical, incredible place. We get into the early 2000s. Of course, we do have 9/11. We do have things get a little darker. But that decade, the early social media platforms, the optimism, Wikipedia. I mean, it was just incredible what this technology was going to do for democracy. I'd like to bring readers back now to the peak year of 2011, a year that starts with the Arab Spring. And we think, what dictator can stand up to people empowered by Facebook and other platforms?
Right.
That year ends with Occupy Wall Street. We think the people empowered. So 2011, we really is the peak year of techno-democratic optimism. 2012, Barack Obama's reelected. Gay marriage resolutions are passing all around the country. So it looks like this direction to history is clearly one direction, and it would be the direction that would be favored by progressives. And then everything goes to hell beginning around 2014. A lot of weird stuff happens in 2014. My argument in the essay is that tribalism is very old. This left-right dynamic is very old, but something changed in the 2010s that made us afraid of each other, that made it very easy for people to intimidate each other, and that leads to fragmentation within the left, fragmentation within the right. And the key metaphor, if you go back to the Tower of Babel story in Genesis, it's a very short little story. The key line is that when God is offended by humanity's hubris, he says, let us go down and confuse their language so that they may not understand one another. And that's what's new. The break, it's not the cross-party hatred. That's been going on for a while. We've had that before. It's this new thing of just everything breaking up. We can't understand each other.
That piece reminds me, oftentimes people will talk about Orwell's 1984, but what you just mentioned about the confusion is really more reminiscent to me of Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, where it's a sort of, you could say, a fire hose of falsehood, or this inability to sort of discern what's real or what isn't. Is that an apt analogy to what you're describing?
It's, there are elements of both, right? We all read, at least from my generation, we all read those two works in ninth grade or whenever it was.
Yep.
And that's the way the 20th century thought about things. Either it's going to be, dictators like Stalin and Hitler, or it's going to be some like techno oppression. But neither of those anticipated the decentralization revolution. That is, what's happening now has some echoes of, the Stasi in East Germany, and people are afraid to speak and people can rat on each other, but there's no dictator. And so just as, I've been learning a little bit about cryptocurrencies and, decentralized finance, we talk about DeFi. In the same way, you might speak about DTOT, that is, there can be decentralized totalitarianism without any totalitarian, without any leader. We can all be afraid of each other, and that has effects that suppress discourse, suppress people dissenting on both sides. Moderates in particular are afraid to speak up because on the right, you're going to get death threats and be horrifically attacked. On the left, you'll be called a racist or transphobe. So social media makes it very easy for the passionate extremes to attack the moderates and to attack leaders. That, I think, has messed us all up since around 2014.
How did Donald Trump sort of exploit these circumstances?
Donald Trump, the diagnosis I hear from my friends who are clinical psychologists is narcissistic personality disorder. everything's about him. He is not an evil genius. He is not Manichaean. He's not like this like brilliant Manichaean behind the scenes manipulator. He is what he is. He is a narcissist with very little self-control. And he just does what he does. And it just so happens that the political world, the communications world went insane around 2014 to allow someone like him to actually be out there tweeting. And, we have negative partisanship. The more you attack the other side, the more people like you on your side. So my argument is that Donald Trump didn't cause the collapse of the Tower of Babel. He certainly made things worse. He made everything worse, made the passions worse, made the norms worse. I mean, I blame him for a lot. But had he never run, most of these things would still have happened, not quite as intensely, but they would have still happened. He benefited because in the pre-Babel era, before we were all fragmented, people saying the things he said, like that was automatic exclusion. Like everybody would have shunned him. But afterwards, nothing makes sense anymore. There is no overarching narrative. It's Babel all the way forward.
Yeah, one of the things that I think resonates with me in terms of understanding that period is it seemed that it became much more acceptable to publicly say a lot of the things that before some people understood, I think this, but I probably shouldn't say it. I shouldn't say it at work. I shouldn't say it on social media. It was sort of normalized to some degree.
That's right. Well, that's right. And there was such a thing as polite society. There were some norms that were widely shared, maybe not on the far right and far left, but there was a sort of a general consensus of polite society, and you could be outside, you could quickly get yourself outside polite society. Part of what I'm arguing is that there's always, let's say, how much voice do people have at each point on the spectrum? And it's always the case that people who are angry and loud are going to have more voice because they try harder. So the middle has less and the extremes have more. When social media comes in, and I don't mean early social media, I mean only after we get the like button, the retweet button, that's 2009. We get threaded comments in 2013, which encourages everyone to fight with everyone in the comment section.
Mm-hmm.
It's this new hyper-viralized environment. That's what changes things. And when that happens, now the extremes get much more voice, and the middle 80% gets much less. Many of us, we just keep our heads down. People are exhausted. They don't want to speak up. And we can't have a deliberative democracy when most people don't want to even join the discussion. And when the people in the discussion are incentivized, literally incentivized to be assholes. The more of an asshole you are, the more you say things that are extreme, the more you will be successful. So the incentives are so antithetical to what we need in our deliberative democracy.
You talked about the spectrum. There's this book, Waves of Rancor, which I think might not even be in print anymore, which talked about the early days of talk radio, how it was dominated by sort of conservative ownership as well as by church radio, low-power church radio, and that this was part of why the right started to dominate talk radio. Now, one of the things I also think is a factor is that some of these platforms are better vessels for some right-wing ideas. So like, for example, if you think about taxes, the right-wing idea of taxes are bad, maybe they're theft, maybe they're slavery, let's just make them as low as possible. It's super simple and concise, and it's great for talk radio. The position on the left is not let's make taxes as high as possible. It's, well, we need the right level of taxation to account for the social programs right? So it's already sort of like structurally a problem. Is this to some degree also a factor, but maybe even more so when it comes to social media, the number of characters that are allowed on Twitter and this type of thing?
Absolutely. If you think about the conditions under which people can have a discussion when they disagree, here's a really, really bad way to do it. How about let's bring people together and have them be perhaps anonymous. Let's bring people together who have no shared past, no shared future. It's a temporary interaction. Let's bring them together in a place in which you guarantee that there is no context. Whatever you say will be taken out of context because there is no context, especially Twitter. Twitter, of course, being the worst of all. And let's do it. Let's have this discussion take place in the middle of the Roman Colosseum so that the stands, you're having a discussion with someone, but you're not really talking to the person. You don't really care about the person. The audience, thousands of people all around cheering for blood. Some are on your side, some are on the other person's side. Now, what are the odds that you're going to have a good discussion about what do you think the proper tax rate should be in our country? What should we do about immigration? Like, you cannot have a discussion. So your question started with talk radio, and that is a huge part of our polarization. It's something I mentioned in the Atlantic article. I should have spent more time on. talk radio really does radicalize the right in the beginning of the 70s, but especially in the 90s. Fox News, all the talk radio stars, doesn't have a similar effect on the left. But I think my sense is that while talk radio made the right radicalize in the 90s, social media made the left radicalize in the mid 2010s. There's been a lot written from Matt Iglesias originally and others calling it the Great Awakening, an intensification of, wokeness is the word used by the right, but it really did change the dynamics on the left. There's always been, and there still is in the Democratic Party, a healthy debate between more the far left and the moderate left. So in the party, that dynamic is still going on. Whereas in the Republican Party, there is none. All the moderates are dead or expelled. So the Republican Party, I say in the paper, the Republican Party has become the stupid party. You become stupid when you shoot your moderates. If you don't have dissent, if you have orthodoxy, you become stupid. You'll be wrong on most things. The Republican Party is the stupid party. The Democrats are not. But my argument is that if you look in many of our epistemic institutions, that is, those that generate knowledge, universities, media, the arts, journalism, these, of course, are dominated by progressives. That's always been the case, and it's very much the case now. When those places, like the New York Times, when people can't dissent within a progressive organization, then that organization becomes structurally stupid. And so I think social media has intensified the power of progressive activists in a way that has often suppressed dissent on the left. And I think that actually, in the long run, I think that hurts the left.
Yeah, we talked before the start of the interview about how there is an asymmetry in how the extremes on either side are sort of impacted by the status quo. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that, but I also think it's important to mention the extreme of the left, however we define it. And I think sometimes what's called extreme maybe isn't that extreme by global standards, but let's put that aside for a moment. It doesn't seem to have that much power in the Democratic Party, as evidenced by on Reddit and Twitter in 2020. It looked like Bernie was just running away with this thing. And it wasn't even close in terms of how Democratic voters actually voted in the primaries.
That's right. No, you're right. It doesn't have that much power within the party. And that's the asymmetry. There's a great quote from John Stuart Mill. It's something like, in all of the great disputes about social matters, each side has been right in what it affirmed, though wrong in what it denied. And when I talk to people on the left, the number of crimes committed by the Republican Party, certainly from denying Barack Obama's Supreme Court appointment to trying to storm the Capitol to overturn, the crimes it's unbelievable, the crimes the Republican Party has committed, and there is no comparison to what the Democrats have done. So people on the left are certain of that, and they're right. They're absolutely right. Why don't those damn Republicans realize that? Well, now talk to conservatives. Some will acknowledge that, the party, I'm not so comfortable with this, and then, boy, do they have a list of crimes of what the CDC did, what the media did, what the universities did, and they've got videos and they've got quotes, and they're quotes from people that you know. So here's what I'm saying. There's this giant asymmetry, and it's as in an argument between two spouses. Each side, they've got their list of violations of the other, and they don't match up. We're not talking about the same thing. So that's why, look, I've always been on the left. I was always trying to help the Democrats speak more intelligently about morality. That's why I got into political psychology. But when I wrote The Righteous Mind in 2011, I was writing it 2010-11, I began to get concerned, like, oh my God, actually, our country is coming apart. The partisanship is becoming outrageous. This is really dangerous. And so I started focusing more on how do we fix our institutions, get our political game working so that we can address these problems. And now I'm in a state of complete panic, because I think if you look at the trends, we are so far from, we're so far from even understanding not just the other side, but what our own side is doing. We are so confused. We are basically lost in Babel.
Last thing I want to ask you about, and I know our time is not unlimited, if we narrow down a little bit and think about if and how social media should be managed or regulated based on your interpretation. Every idea is out there, from no regulation whatsoever, just like allow everything and let it police itself, to we need some kind of nonpartisan government board, but who decides who's on the board and all of the problems that come with that. Yeah. Where is your thinking on this at this point?
Okay. Well, so my thinking is, first, please stop talking about content moderation. And you framed it the way everyone does, is, are we going to have more or less? No, I don't want to talk about that, because the question is just, are we going to move it up or down a little bit? Elon Musk would have moved it down. We'd have less moderation. Democrats would move it up. No, that's not where the action is.
So what's the right question?
The right question is, what is this technology, this platform, that has changed our discourse? What is the architecture? What are the dynamics of this new platform after 2009 that has made it not, we're never going to stop people from posting crazy nonsense. But why is it that after 2009, the crazier the nonsense is, the further it goes?
Mm.
What changed and how can we unchange it? And so there's two things. The first thing to attend to is who is on the platforms. And here, right now, any Russian agent can create 1,000 accounts a day and run them either personally or with bots. Any jerk, any asshole, and there are people who are trolls who have personality disorders, they get to harass as many people as they want. They get to make death threats. Nothing happens. Maybe the account gets shut down. They can make 100 more accounts. So the first thing is we must have user verification. You can still post with a fake name, but to get an account with posting privileges, we can't just let everyone make 1,000 fake accounts. That's insane. So any large platform, and Elon Musk even proposed this, at least partially, about authenticate users. So that's one. Pay attention to whether you have to at least show you're a person and old enough. Like that would cut down on a lot of it. The second thing is the dynamics of amplification. Right now, the incentives are the nastier you are, the further you go. Let's try to reverse that. So it'd be very easy for Facebook or Twitter to quantify using AI and human coders how aggressive is each person. You get an aggression score. If all you do is say, screw you, jerk, with exclamation points, you get a 5. You're like, overall, on average, you're a 5 on a 1 to 5 scale. And what I'd like to see is when we start to open an account, your default is the filter set to 4. So I will see only people who are 4 and below, and the people who are 5, I don't see them. They don't see me. I don't want them in my public square. They don't belong in the public square. Now, if I want to lower my filter to 3 or 2, I can do that. If I want to see the assholes, I can raise it to 5. If we did that, the incentive would be no longer be as much of an asshole as you can. It would be, you know what? If you're a complete asshole, you're going to lose most of the world. They're not going to listen to you. So that's the sort of change that would be completely transformative. Whereas the eternal argument about more or less content moderation, who decides and where's the line, that hasn't gone anywhere in 100 years, 200
Correct.
years. It's never going to go anywhere.
Absolutely fascinating ideas. We've been speaking with Jonathan Haidt. The article in The Atlantic is called Why the Past 10 Years of American Life Have Been Uniquely Stupid. Jonathan, always really appreciate your insights.
Thanks so much, David. Let me just end by saying I've put all my resources on a single webpage. If you go to jonathanhaidt.com/social media, I have everything you could want to know about the effects of social media on teen mental health and on democracy, links to hundreds and hundreds of academic articles. So that's a sort of a one-stop shop where I show my work.